questions that we have here in the chat. Hi everybody. So I will answer some of these questions that we have in the chat. If there are any other questions that you have for my presentation or otherwise, please add them to the chat. So the first question here is, how can we help inspire others to care about the planet? So this is a really great question, and I think about this a lot. And I think I guess there are a lot of different answers that we could go with this. And first of all, it would be to learn about our planet, learn about nature, and become and share your passion with others. You know, you learn about something. You learn about something very interesting that you have a lot of passion around. My daughter really loves marine mammals. She comes home from school every day and tells us stories about what she's learned about baleen whales and other marine mammals, and it's really energizing. And so I think that if we were all challenged to go out and like share one fun fact about our world, about nature with our neighbors and talk about what that means, I think that would go a long way to help inspiring others to care about the planet. So inspiration and positivity are all contagious. And so share that with other folks. So another question that's in the chat here is, do NASA astronauts ever work on climate change projects? And so normally, when NASA astronauts go into space, they're not working on climate change projects, but that doesn't mean after they're astronauts that they don't. So actually, I'll get back to that in a minute. The first thing I want to say is that right now, actually, we're working on at NASA Langley, working on a project that is going to put a climate instrument onto the International Space Station that's hopefully going to launch in 2023. Everything's on schedule for that to happen. And so in a way, then astronauts will help the climate science by making sure the instrument gets into the space station pod correctly and everything. But normally when astronauts are in space, they're not working on climate projects. However, a mentor of mine and somebody I very much respect, Piers Sellers, he passed away a few years ago, but he was an astronaut and was the head of science at Goddard Space Flight Center, and he did a lot of really great work. So astronauts do work and study our Earth and do work on climate change projects, but not generally while they're in space. The next question here is, how did you fall into this career path? And when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? So I talked about this a little bit in the beginning of my presentation, but I know folks probably came in late, so I'll say it again. But the first thing I'll say is that when I was growing up, I wanted to be a professional baseball player. That's the first thing. But my story is that I became interested in the weather and the atmosphere and the clouds in the 4th grade because of a really influential teacher that I had, Mrs. Benner. And she gave me the role of what I called chief data logger. So every day into the classroom, I would come in, and in the corner of our classroom was the digital readout monitor for our school's weather station. So on there was the temperature, the humidity, and the dew point, and I would write it on the board. And then I would sort of lead a discussion around what that meant or how it changed from yesterday. And so we discussed the weather. And then from there, I was just curious about, well, why does the weather work that way? And so from there, I wanted to become a TV broadcast meteorologist because at the time that was the only kind of thing I knew about meteorologists and weathermen, is that they were on TV and talked about the weather, every night at 6 or every night at 11 or in the mornings before I went to school. But what I learned when I went to college to become a weatherman is that there's so many other great careers as well that you can do with meteorology degree and really help the world other than just being on TV. So, for those of you who aren't as familiar with all the different options that you can go with in meteorology, there are a lot more options than just being a TV weatherman. And for me, it came down to really having a passion for understanding how the details of how everything worked. And what I learned what I figured out and learned throughout that process is that, if I can figure out how this cloud works or how this energy flows around our planet and how that impacts temperature, we can actually make our models, our predictions better, and then we can save lives. And so that's what really still drives me is the ability to like learn about the world, how it works, and apply that knowledge to make the world a better place. So thanks for that question. The next question is, what did you want to be? Oh, I already answered that one. Let's go to the next one. Do you ever work with climate scientists from other countries? And so the answer to this question is definitely yes, all the time. And in fact, one thing I'll say is that in going to during the pandemic, we've been forced to work virtually essentially all the time, and I've worked I've worked more than a year now out of my house, my home office, which isn't how it was before. Before I went into the office at NASA every day and worked with my colleagues there. But this being forced to be online all the time actually dropped the barrier of working with my international colleagues. And so I actually have much more conversations with my international colleagues from like England and Germany and France and Scandinavian countries, in Canada, all around the world, really. Time zones get in the way in collaborating with other folks. But yeah, there's a lot of different countries. Pretty much all the different countries of the world have climate scientists, and climate science is at its best when we're taking all those ideas from all the different scientists around the world and putting them together to come up with kind of a coherent picture of how the world works. Science really works at its best when all the different ideas, a diversity of ideas, are coming together, and we have to reconcile the differences. That's when we come out with a hypothesis and a theory that's really better than what anybody could come up with on their own. So thanks for that question. Next question is there something you haven't done yet or a project you haven't worked on that you would like to? Oh, this is a really great question. And so I've been working on something like this for a while, and I think I'm this close to having it come true. So I've been studying the Arctic for a long time, but I haven't really spent a lot of time there personally to like observe the system, right? I live in Southeast Virginia in the east coast of the United States, and we don't get a lot of Arctic type climate, no sea ice around here. And also some of the questions I have been asking about how does sea ice impact clouds and how does clouds impact sea ice? Because all of my science questions have really gone back to clouds because again, they were like my first love, right? So I've been working for a lot of years to try to get a field campaign to be the lead of a field campaign to go into the Arctic. So this is where we go take a bunch of scientists, go into the Arctic, stay there for a couple months, and take a lot of data, essentially. And we go there and we take data that's going to help us answer this basket of science questions that we have. For instance, what is the impact of clouds on sea ice melt? Do they accelerate sea ice melt or slow down sea ice melt? Questions like that. And I worked with a close friend of mine and colleague at University of Colorado, Sebastian Schmidt, and we have put together this idea to NASA on a mission to go and spend 2 weeks in Thule, Greenland, 2 months in Thule, Greenland, and take their 2 airplanes to Thule, Greenland, and fly them out over the sea ice and take measurements of the ice, and the surface, and characteristics, and the clouds, and the winds, and the temperature and humidity, a bunch of other things, and the energy flows in order to answer some of our really important science questions so we can better predict how sea ice is. So I know that was a kind of a long way to get there, but one of the things I haven't done yet that I want to do is lead and be part of a field mission into the Arctic to really understand these fine descaled details about how the system works and to spend some time there. And it looks like hopefully in summer 2024, I'll get the chance to do that. So that's one of the things that I really would like to do that I haven't got a chance to do in science yet. So thanks for that question. I also mentioned one of my mentors. Is there anyone else in climate science, past or present, that you look up to? So yeah, I'll say you probably don't know his name, but I will say a name. And one of my first climate science mentors is a guy named Graham Stevens. And right now he works at NASA's JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he does clouds and climate science, much like I do. He is a lead scientist for a really big new NASA mission. It's going to hopefully launch by 2029. That's going to be very important for climate and understanding cloud processes. But the reason why I've always looked up to him, which has gone back to my days in graduate school. So I went to Florida State at graduate school, and I first met Graham in 2006. So this is a long time ago. And I had always read his papers. But what I've always really admired about him is that he's unafraid to take I'll say it this way and then I'll explain, because it's probably not as clear when not being in science, but he kind of lives on the bridge between models and observations. So and he's really a scientist at first. So in the world of science, we have a lot of scientists that focus on taking new measurements. And then we have another group of scientists that tend to come up with new ways, develop models that produce projections. These are computer models, right? Computer models meaning like a series of equations that we solve in order to predict the weather and the climate. And so what I really respect and admire about Graham is he is willing to live in both of those different spheres, different camps at the same time, with the goal to better understand our climate system. Some scientists will end up in one camp or the other and never stray. But I think what I learned from him is that the only way to answer really important science questions is to take both models and observations, use them together to learn more, and so to really be a complete scientist. And so that's why I really look up to Graham. And he taught me that that's a bigger picture perspective about how science works. The next question here, are you optimistic about the future of climate change? So I am optimistic. If you look at and it's hard to see why, I'll be honest. It seems that the world is slow to respond and to make the cuts in carbon emissions that we need to make in order to get there. And there's a long way to go in order to avert the worst of the potential climate impacts and impacts of climate change on our communities and on our environment. But I'm hopeful in part because I was at COP21. I had the privilege and the pleasure to go to COP21, which was the climate summit in Paris that happened a few years ago. And I was asked to go there and represent NASA. I got to stand in front and talk about some of these similar type of visualizations that I showed you earlier today, and to share with the world of leaders, government leaders around the world, all the great work in science and data that NASA has and what it means for our planet. And so while I was there, I heard lots of really inspiring stories from all the different communities around the world that are acting, and going out and mitigating, and they're taking climate action. And so I know in this country, when you look to Washington, DC, and how nothing seems to really being done in order to address climate change, it's easy to get pessimistic. But when you look lower and realize that in the end, for any of the stuff to change, we need a groundswell of folks that are really pushing to change the current course that we're on when it comes to climate change and our carbon pollution. There's a lot of optimism that can be had there, because there's a lot of really, really smart, energetic, passionate, enthusiastic folks, and cities around this country and around the world are doing things. They are making decisions to be more sustainable and to be cleaner, and so we may succeed. I think we will succeed. So thank you for that question. So with that, that's the end of our question time. I really appreciate for everybody's questions and for their attention, and thank you guys. See you next time.